During my senior year of college, I was discussing my values with Rabbi Morris Goldfarb of Cornell Hillel, and I had mentioned that I felt a strong sense of responsibility towards others. He asked me where these values came from, but I could not answer him or pinpoint the origins. I had almost no formal religious training. My mother reared me, and she was not religious. Perhaps indirectly then, in my neighborhood or in my school, I acquired a concern for others, a slumbering sensitivity towards social justice. Slumbering sensitivity towards social justice. That was the opening of my dad's admissions essay to the Jewish Theological Seminary, dated January 16, 1974. A little more than 2 years after he married my mom, and several years before my sister Dina and I were born. Growing up, my father was more dedicated to the violin than he was to Judaism. He was more devoted to theater, to its academic team, and to his 3-on-3 basketball squad, the All Brains. He knew more about Peabody and Sherman than about Hillel and Shammai, more about Arthur Conan Doyle than Abraham Joshua Heschel. Raised with his brother Michael by a single mother, he and his family were more likely to be the recipients of Milut Chasadim than practitioners. But then in college in the late 60s, he saw escalating racial and political confrontations across campus, and his slumbering sensitivity towards social justice was awakened. After being given a low draft number, as you heard, he became a conscientious objector, and what was his first pre-rabbinic counseling role, he helped others navigate his own feelings towards enlisting with one of our guests here today, Rabbi Lerner. He found alternative service as a teacher in Brooklyn in a school for pregnant girls who back then were actually removed from their own schools, once found to be with child, and then enrolled in JTS to further his studies in Torah and Tikkun Olam. My mom, meanwhile, had met my dad in high school in a play where my dad starred as half the magicians duo called The Great Sebastians, with my mom a member in their act. The perfect line he delivered, referring to my mom's character that won her heart. Can you read the highlighter? Actually, I put this myself, so I actually have
I was going to say this, but I'll say it now. So I'm a mind reading act. I'm in the audience, and blindfolded on the stage is my wife, the mind reader. So I go into the audience, and I say, my left hand, madam, what am I touching? And she responds, a lady's head. And then I say, can you tell me the color of her hair? And the woman on stage says, tonight, it's blonde.
Compelling stuff, right? So it's a line, tonight it's blonde, which I don't buy, since I've never seen my mom with blonde hair, much as I've never seen my dad without a mustache. They married just weeks before she finished college. She was not expecting to marry a rabbi, to say the least, but she was able to maintain a career as a copywriter, a columnist, a marketer, and a small business owner, and worked to make lasting bonds with members of all 3 of my dad's synagogues, though never settling on others' expectations of her or her role. Over time, she and my dad made a deal. She goes to shul sometimes, and he periodically attends country music concerts with her. It's been working for more than 4 decades. After JTS, my dad's first congregation was Beth El in East Windsor, New Jersey. We left there before my 3rd birthday, so I don't remember anything about it. But there's photo evidence on the table out there that you can see that my parents were young ones and they were there. Beth El, my dad was both a rabbi and religious school director in turns, and he once dressed as Megillah Gorilla for Purim. In 1985, we moved to Nashville, and my sister was born 2 years later. Now, there are several ways to look at my dad's experiences in Tennessee. The Quentin Tarantino movie version would include the several murdered congregants whose funerals he presided over, the congregants who had merely been victims of attempted murder, the time our synagogue was spray-painted with swastikas, and the time it was shot up in a drive-by. That's supposed to be funny. No? Okay. Whatever. The Hallmark movie version would include what by then had become a fully awakened sensitivity towards social justice. the annual Kol Nidre can drive that grew by the bushel in his years, the bar and bat mitzvah twinning program with Jews from Ethiopia and the Soviet Union who are not able to celebrate their own milestones at 12 or 13, the hosting of the Room at the Inn program for the homeless in the synagogue social hall. Now, the movie most likely to be made, after all, Nashville has more churches per capita than any other city in America, is the one produced by the Christian Broadcasting Network that would include the trip my dad led with members of the local Christian clergy to Israel, the interfaith Thanksgiving, Pesach, and September 11th services, how he'd sell the chametz each Passover to the city's non-Jewish police chief, and how for a time my dad was in charge of an annual program for municipal and business leadership in the city that highlighted Nashville's religious and ethnic diversity. Shabbat mornings in Nashville were much like as they are here, except there we had a Joe Cohen instead of a Charlie Cohen, and a Jerry Wise instead of a Jerry Wiener. People often ask us, then as now, if Dina or I or my mom would get a preview of the sermon. We never have, other than knowing that the topic of the second day of Rosh Hashanah would be Israel. Now think about all the sermons he's written over the years. Is it odd to be the subject of one instead of the presenter right now? It's a little odd, right? I actually calculated the number, and it's 4,715, just on Shabbatot and holidays alone. That number should be lower, of course, way lower, but he refused to recycle his Nashville ones when he moved to Fairlawn in 2007. Like anyone would have known that. One of the more memorable sermons for me occurred a few years ago when, in what felt like an inside joke shared just between the two of us, my dad began a high holiday sermon quoting Walking Through a Wall, a hilarious postmodern poem by Louis Jenkins about walking through a wall that one of our favorite actors, Mark Rylance, recited in his 2011 Tony's acceptance speech. By now, I'm sure that you're all aware that in addition to a sensitivity towards social justice that my dad passed down, there was also a theater appreciation that he passed down to Dina and me. My dad did for a time actually want to become a drama teacher. One of his greatest joys is from teaching. You can see that if you've attended one of his weekly Torah study classes, or if you've had the pleasure of asking him which rollicking nonfiction book he's read recently. Whether the topic was, and this is not a joke, though this is a really tough crowd, the history of salt or the uses of cadavers. I also saw it when he blew the shofar at an assembly for my 99% non-Jewish high school one year. Try explaining spitting notes to a ram's horn to a bunch of 16-year-olds. Or when he taught Tanakh to my high school English class. You know, even though he left New York, he was always a New Yorker through and through. Back in Nashville, he'd take the graduating Hebrew school students, usually about a dozen juniors, on what he called a trip of Jewish New York. He'd pull out all the stops, starting with visits to the historic H&H Bagels and Zabars, and sure other notable spots like Eldon She's Synagogue and the Jewish Museum. My dad did not grow up observant, but he knew you couldn't get a good bagel outside the Northeast. A convergence of religious and social factors, my dad wrote in the admissions essay, caused me to decide that I wanted to become a rabbi. Isn't that what tzedakah is, that convergence? On these trips to New York, he'd give each student a roll of quarters and tell them they could decide how best to distribute it to charity. Some would give to panhandlers or street performers, or would place the money in push visit synagogues that we visited. The lesson being that, given that money and time are finite, every person must carefully choose how they fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah. Despite his long-term support of Project Ezra and Mazon and the North American Conference on Ethiopian Jewry, his greatest act of tzedakah may be his lifelong support of a Queens-based baseball franchise. You know, one of our tradition's greatest sages said, "I've been in this game 100 years, but I see new ways to lose I never knew existed before." That wasn't Rashi or Rambam, but Casey Stengel, the Mets' first manager back in 1962. Hashem knew, God knew, when you batted out of order. Zad knew, Hamas knew, Marvelous Mark missed first and second after hitting a triple. The temple is no longer standing in Jerusalem, but at least my dad and I can make an annual pilgrimage to that Ebbets Field-looking structure off the 7 train, where the promising spring competitors become summer cellar dwellers, and all season long find new ways to lose. I want to end with this. I do not know what setting I will be working as a rabbi, my dad wrote, whether with a congregation, with a Hill organization, or in some other community. I can promise you that he wasn't thinking about Middle Tennessee on that one. And I was already done with grad school when my parents made the decision to move back east 11 years ago. But I'm so glad they did. I'm keenly aware of how Jewish values and the sensitivity towards social justice have guided his time here. It's telling that the only book of words my dad has produced, he's made tons of photo books, as I'm sure you've seen out there. The only book of words was in regard to the Jews of Patzov, a place he learned about and dedicated his time to thanks to this congregation. He loves the beautiful scroll of Haftarot, the new sanctuary, and El Nora Alila and Ne'ilah just as much. Thank you so much for embracing him. Growing up in East Flatbush in the 50s and 60s, my dad could not have predicted that he'd end up here today, reflecting on a 40-year career in the rabbinate, being among those he's comforted while mourning, counseled while in distress, and of course congratulated while experiencing joyous life cycle events. It's quite a moment for him and for all of us too. For all of us here who have benefited from his guidance, we have in us a sensitivity to Torah, to our Jewish observance, to tzedakah, and to social justice that will last long past his tenure here.